You're listening to the Back Home Network, presented by Home Field Apparel.
Welcome back to CrimsonCast, folks. Galen Clavio joining you solo on the 5th of April of 2024. It's good to have you folks back with us again, and looking forward to chatting a little bit this morning. Relatively short podcast, couple of things. Not a whole lot of IU content, although we're going to start off with something very important in the IU universe. First of all, a couple of business items. Just a reminder, we are part of the Back Home Network. Be sure to check out all the Back Home Network shows. Of course, Assembly Call, both after games, although sadly, no games for quite a while. And of course, Assembly Call Radio every Thursday. Be sure to check out what Jared and Coach and Ryan and Andy and the whole crew have to say about what's going on in the IU universe. A lot of portal intrigue going on right now. We've, of course, also got the X's and Joe's podcast, which I highly recommend. Go check that out as well. The entire Back Home Network, including Tony Adranya and his transfer portal tracker, are brought to you by Home Field Apparel, your place to go for the finest in college fashions, the softest fabrics, the coolest designs, and a way to satisfy your sports polyamory. I'm doing that right now. For those of you watching on Spotify or on YouTube, I've got my University of Miami crew neck on, which, of course, I taught at the University of Miami for a couple of years, and I retain a bit of an affinity for the place. And unfortunately, kind of feel almost a kinship between Miami football and Indiana men's basketball at times. So if you've got some polyamorous feelings about your sports teams, if you love more than one, it's okay. Home Field's got you covered, and there's plenty of stories to fall in love with. I know that there's a not insignificant section of the IU fan base who, depending on what happens on Saturday, might decide that they want to purchase some NC State apparel or some UConn apparel or what have you. So you can go to Home Field Apparel, use the code HOME23, get 15% off your first order. And of course, Home Field Apparel will have additional items coming out throughout the course of the next months. And I mean, they always have something new. Whether it's summer and they've got some new designs that they're trying out, or fall when they really roll the carpet out for the college football season, Home Field Apparel, the place to go. So go check them out. Proud sponsors of the Back Home Network. Also, wanted to remind everybody that we are on Substack, crimsoncast.substack.com. Go check us out there. You can subscribe for free. You get emailed to you podcasts on a regular basis, which is great. And we also have a VIP section, which is not required. But if you want to help financially support the podcast, $5 a month, $50 a year, we try to do at least one or two special videos for VIP subscribers throughout the course of every week. We'll have some additional items that we'll be cooking up throughout the course of the summer. So again, go to crimsoncast.substack.com. Consider being part of the community. Also, an interesting programming note for those of you, I don't know where you get your podcasts. I know from looking at the numbers, most of you are getting your podcasts from Apple, which is fine, no problems. But if you haven't been on Spotify podcasts yet, I would recommend checking it out, because they've actually enabled video on a lot of their podcasts, which I think is fascinating. And it's something that I honestly believe could help Spotify get a little bit further ahead in the podcast game. For those of you who don't know the background of how this all works, Spotify has been trying to do podcasts. They've really tried to become the podcast place. They've had some controversy over that at times, but they have their own app. A lot of people have the app. One of the things that they've started doing is actually showcasing video when a podcast is uploaded directly to Spotify. And I think that's really fascinating, because it opens up some interesting vistas in terms of the visual aspects of podcasts. I think are becoming more and more popular. I actually found this out because I've been watching and listening to a podcast from a former student of mine, Carly. Well, I know her as Carly Murata, but she's an anchor in Wisconsin, a sports anchor in Wisconsin, also play-by-play broadcaster up there. She and her family started a podcast called The Dinner Table, and I called it up the other day, and boom, there's video on Spotify. I was like, this is awesome. And so this episode right now, if you go to Spotify and check it out, you might see the video that we recorded. I've also got this up on YouTube, so you don't have to go over to Spotify, but check it out. If you're on Spotify, if you've been thinking about Spotify as a podcast venue, it might be interesting. Anyway, wanted to start off two things I want to talk about today. The first, a big congratulations to Sara Scalia. Again, ESPN, that's Sara Scalia. They really seem to struggle with her name at times, for winning the women's three-point shooting contest yesterday. I'm going to try something here that I haven't done in a while, which is actually, since we're trying to do video, I'm going to try to play her final round here. And get this rolling. Probably hear it in the background. Just a great shooting performance by Sara, as she ends up winning on the last rack on the women's side, and had 16 threes dropped in the overall championship. Keisei Tominaga ends up winning with a couple of balls to spare, but just a tremendous performance by Sara, and we're proud of her without question for what she was able to accomplish there. And watching her throughout the course of the year has been just a real joy for IU basketball fans, and seeing her come in as a transfer and just kind of sink right in to the overall culture of IU women's basketball, and just a great accomplishment for her. I know everybody was really excited about that watching last night. So congratulations to her. And I got to say, ESPN got to do a bit better, not just the name pronunciation issues, but the broadcast of the final rounds of that three-point shooting contest. It kind of felt like the broadcasters were like broadcasting the third hole of some random golf tournament, as opposed to something that was that exciting. So would like to see that pick up a little bit, but what are you going to do? Anyway, also congrats to Keisei Tominaga. A great performance by him, obviously, and he was a great competitor throughout the course of not just the season, but that as well. Also, tough luck for the Indiana State Sycamores last night, as they had a 7-point lead and then blew it at the very end. Seton Hall ends up winning the NIT championship. Just a crusher. I feel so bad for all the Indiana State fans that were hoping for a postseason title of some sort. And after the season that team had, you really feel like they earned something more than they ended up getting. But still, I mean, for a program that's been down as much as that program has, it's great to watch them have this type of season. And obviously everything's going to change. It looks like Josh Schertz is going to head to St. Louis after this, which I don't blame him. 6 years, $12 million contract, and a higher caliber of league. And that's what you got to do as a head coach, is move up. So we'll see what happens with Indiana State. Hopefully they can hire somebody up and coming who can really help to make a difference and keep that program up in the upper reaches of the Missouri Valley, because it really belongs there as far as I'm concerned. It's one of those programs, and Ball State's kind of in this same boat. It's like you feel like they should be better at that level, at that mid-major level, and whether it's budgetary issues or whether it's administrative issues, both have had trouble. Indiana State's had less trouble, I'd argue, than Ball State in terms of keeping themselves afloat. But it means so much to fans, and it really does help. And this is one of the things I talk about all the time in sports, this idea that you are ultimately looking at a circumstance where sports are not a distraction. Sports help to galvanize your community, both the university community and the broader community. Sports help to bring your alumni back. They increase alumni donations. They get people fired up about being associated with the school. This is something that, honestly, I feel Indiana at times it's not been a lesson Indiana's necessarily learned. We've had administrations that felt like sports took away from the academic mission. I've always felt that was an unfortunate interpretation of how sports can operate in these spaces. Yes, are sports different from what happens in the classroom? Of course, I say that as a person who teaches at Indiana and has been a professor here for 15 years. But that doesn't mean that they're bad. And there's a lot of things that sports do that tie into the overall community mission of a university, and it is important. You may not, some people don't want it to be important to fans. They don't want it to be important to alums, but it's important that your sports teams are competitive, that they embody a certain, set of characteristics that the culture that surrounds your team can get a hold of and be proud of. And when that doesn't happen, you get a lot of people that are discontented, and that ends up negatively affecting donations. It ends up negatively affecting your public perception and the way that people think about your school. And for a place like Indiana State, I think it's vitally important because as higher education becomes more of a questionable proposition in the minds of certain people, as fewer people are going to college, as fewer people are looking as like, where am I putting my money? Why would I want to donate it to that university? Having successful sports teams provides pride, and it provides an incentive for people to continue to get involved at times when perhaps they would question why they were getting involved. And so I think it's opened a lot of people's eyes in Terre Haute. I know from talking with both friends of mine who work at the university, work in the community. I think it's helped to kind of open people's eyes to the idea that, you know, between what Indiana State's done with basketball and what they've done with baseball last year, these are things that can help you. They don't have to be things that are viewed as distractions or you know, contrary to the overall mission of the university. So again, hopefully Indiana State can build on this, and even with the departure of the coach, they can find a way to maintain, you know, competitiveness and relevance over the course of the next 5 to 10 years. Let's switch gears. I wanted to talk a little bit about a story that came out a couple of days ago, and it was this story by Andrew Marchand and Stuart Mandel from The Athletic regarding this Super League idea in college football. And I got a lot of emails. I got a lot of texts about this. People are like, you know, Galen, what is going on here? Is this the end of the collegiate model as we know it? And certainly the way the story is framed, you would think, oh, this is going to happen, and you know, this is going to be a real problem. But I think there's some key issues with the way that this has been presented that probably are going to keep it from ever being something that we have to worry about. So let's start off by talking about, you know, what this Super League looks like. Yeah, I think I've got it up here on screen for those of you who are watching the video. But I'm going to just read a couple of paragraphs here. The current CST, which is the CST is what they're calling College Sports Tomorrow, which that you want to talk about a dumb name for something. I don't know that somebody put, like, serial, there had to have been 3 or 4 focus groups that put College Sports Tomorrow together as the name of this project. Just come on, we can do better than that. Anyway, the current CST outline would create a system that would have the top 70 programs, of which Indiana is one, all members of the 5 former major conferences plus Notre Dame and new ACC member SMU as permanent members, but would encompass all 130 plus FBS universities. The perpetual members would be in 7 10-team divisions, with then an 8th division of teams that would be promoted from the second tier. And that second tier would essentially comprise the 50 teams that are left over, essentially, that are in the group of 5. And there would be a promotion and relegation system where you could come out of that, and then if you don't do well while you're up in that top 10 division, probably 2 or 3 teams get dropped back down into the pool and 2 or 3 new teams come up. So the idea is, well, let's give that lower division of teams an opportunity to compete against the upper division of teams while not threatening the place of the upper division teams. So, you know, very, very European style approach. It also says, like, the playoffs will not require a selection committee because there'll be 8 divisions. So you have 8 division winners and 8 wild cards, which essentially means that in a 16-team playoff, 14 of the 16 teams would come out of the permanent FBS members, and then everybody else would fall in below. So there's a couple of different things that I think I need to talk about with this. So first of all, the idea itself structurally is not that bad. And, you know, I think a lot of people, they look at conference realignment and they've said, well, why do we need 16-team or 18-team conferences? Like, what on earth is going on there? The Big Ten used to have 10 teams. The Pac-10 used to have 10 teams. The ACC used to have 9 teams, believe it or not. You know, why are we going bigger and bigger? So this does bring a little bit more of a sense of normalcy and maybe geographical, you know, consistency to these different divisions. I think that's the idea. That's not bad. And, you know, certainly I think if you were going to take this from like a, hey, we got to blow the whole thing up and start over, which is kind of the premise of this thing, that's not a bad premise to start from. It's like, all right, let's take all these programs that through one means or another have brought themselves up to this high level of college football. Let's split them back down based upon the geography that exists of those teams. Let's not worry about the original associations with the conferences, and let's just set it up like that. That's not that bad. And even the idea of no selection committee and just have like an automatic bid and then a wild card out of each of those divisions, that's also not bad. And there's some fairness there. It's like you should win your division, but if you don't, well, you've still got a chance to get into the playoff, and in the playoff, anything can happen. So I don't hate all of that. And I like the 16-team playoff idea in general. I think that makes sense. That's what they've used at the FCS level for a while. The problem with this proposal is no one's going to support it in college athletics because the power in college athletics is really with the conferences. And this is something that I think if you read the article, one of the things that gets noted in the article is that there's a lot of problems with the way that the CST has decided to approach this because, ultimately the CST seems to be trying to approach it from the standpoint that this is about to go bankrupt and it needs saving. And as a result, we got to blow up the current power structure and we got to reconsolidate a power structure around something different, which of course is run by the people that are proposing the CST. Very convenient. But it's not a whole lot different from what happened in the 1990s when college football used to just be this kind of disassociated group of conferences. There was no formal national championship. And it was the conferences in the 1990s that got together and said, we can do better than this. We can make more money. We can consolidate power. That's where the Bowl Alliance and then the Bowl Coalition and then ultimately the BCS and then ultimately the college football playoff came from. That is the entire conceit of that. And as I've talked about on this show before, it's important to remember the NCAA doesn't make money directly off of college football television. The conferences and Notre Dame do. And then that gets distributed down to individual teams and programs. And so what you're looking at is a group of people who's trying to argue that the system is broken and is going to go bankrupt. And that's not really the case. That's where the rhetoric around college sports, like everybody's going to go broke, is dumb. Because when you go and actually look at the money that's being used in college sports and being made and generated through television contracts, it's billions of dollars. Nobody's going broke. There's the way that college athletics works. Most of these conferences are, they're pass-throughs, and most of the teams have set their budgets up so that they're nonprofit entities. So they're spending as much as they're taking in because that allows them to justify the idea that nobody's making money in college athletics. And so this is part of this larger issue of paying players, not controlling coach contracts, like all of those financial elements kind of feed in. So the reason why all this ties back into this CST idea is that even though the business might look like it's losing money, and even though the business itself and the people who are going in front of Congress, commissioners and coaches are saying, we can't afford all of this. Well, they can. And the conferences know it. And if the conferences were really in dire shape, and if the schools were really in dire shape from a financial perspective, they probably would have come up with this idea on their own, but they're not. Instead, what's happening is the strongest conferences, the SEC and the Big Ten, are consolidating power by trying to grab as many television properties as possible. They're trying to edge out their competition, which in this case is the ACC, the Big 12, and the now former Pac-12. And they're perfectly fine with that set of circumstances because then they can dictate the terms. The idea that the Big 10, the SEC, and their television partners, ESPN, Fox, NBC, are going to be like, you know what, you're right, we should let somebody else run this and make all the money is pretty silly. The idea that A, there's money being lost here, and B, that even if there was money being lost, that this group of people would voluntarily cede control to other people so that they could make money off of it. I think, to me, it's the greatest distillation of the problem here, which is just that college sports, they're trying to find a way to spend as little money as possible while making as much money as possible, and they've argued that they're broke, but they're not, and they know it, and if you're paying attention, you know it too. So this will go nowhere. This will not gain traction. There's no incentive for the SEC and the Big Ten and ESPN and Fox to yield any control over the direction that college sports is going right now. And look, it's not going in a great direction, but the reality is there's no incentive to change anything right now because it's not going in a great direction for the traditional aspects of college sports. But for these upper echelon leagues, I think they like the direction that things are going, because at the end of the day, the way things are trending, they're the ones that are ultimately going to have the final say. They're going to have the most control, and that's the way that they want it. And up to this point, nobody's really been able to keep them from doing that. So anyway, we'll talk more about this if there's more to talk about. I actually don't expect to see a whole lot more. The one last thing I'll say, if you're a fan of European football, you'll recognize this. This whole Super League idea that was floated in European football is to some degree a battle between the domestic leagues and the individual brands within their leagues that have equal or greater market share. So like the Premier League clearly would not want a Super League, because that would greatly diminish the Premier League, but the Premier League's pretty powerful. And the Premier League and the Football Association of England was able to essentially stage a populist revolt against the idea of a Super League. But at the bedrock of that was the idea that, well, the Premier League doesn't want to lose its financial place, and they've got some weight to throw around. Same thing with the Champions League. Same thing with Serie A, La Liga, the Bundesliga. Like there's a lot of financial pressures here that are cast as other things. But realistically speaking, what you're dealing with is power structure against power structure. And in this case, much like as in the college football case, the existing leagues or the existing conferences, that's where the power structure is. That's not going to go away just because a group of people comes in and says, we need to have a better idea. You might have a better idea. Unless it's coming from those people, why would they give up what they've already got? So the last thing I'll say is Indiana should be counting its blessings that it joined the Big Ten in 1900 and has been a member in good standing, because either direction, they're being kind of brought along for the ride. And this is, again, it's a cautionary tale to some degree. It's why you have to invest in football like Indiana has this year. It's why you have to invest in your core sports like basketball, because if you don't, you start to lose relevance, and you start to see these much larger brands really starting to put themselves in a position where they can dictate your terms. So glad Indiana is in this mix, and that either way, either the status quo or wherever we're heading with the status quo or under this new system, at least Indiana will be in the mix. I just hope Indiana can continue to improve itself from a competitive perspective so that it can stay in the mix as we move forward. Anyway, that'll wrap things up for us here. Hope you all have a great weekend. Might have a podcast coming out over the weekend. We'll see. But if not, if you're in Bloomington or in Indianapolis, enjoy the eclipse. If we don't talk to you before Monday, be safe, be careful. For CrimsonCast and the Back Home Network, I'm Galen Clavio. We'll catch you folks on the flip side. Bring back the Bison. So long, everybody.